Yesterday, we really spent our time just getting introduced to the mass media and different forms of media, and really focusing on the ways that the media impacts politics. But today, we're kind of going to go way back in time. We're going to kind of trace the development of the mass media so we can see how their role in politics has grown. So we're gonna go back and talk about like very early media. We're gonna talk about how radio and TV and the internet have changed things. And a great example is right here. This is the first televised presidential debate, and so this was really the first time that every American was able to see the two candidates and to see them interact with each other and to put a picture with their voice, and it had huge impacts on the outcome of the election. So we're going to talk about how those kinds of things developed, and we're going to look at the development of radio, TV, and the internet. Today, we want to make sure that we're going to be able to describe the history of the mass media. So we're going to be looking at the influence of newspapers as communication, the influence of radio in politics, and the influence of TV. And we want to be able to see how that has impacted politics today. So we'll also take a look at kind of developing changes, especially with the internet, and how that leads to different interactions with the public. So we'll be answering the question, how did the mass media develop? So we're going to get started with some very, very old media developments here. We're going to go back, way back in history here, and here we've got our friend Franklin Roosevelt. So he's going to be the first president to really realize what an important tool this can be. He's going to make use of the radio to be able to broadcast himself into Americans' homes, to be able to communicate with the public, the voters, on his own. And so this is a big change for the president. But here we see him doing one of his radio addresses, and we've got a bunch of different radio networks there broadcasting this message at the same time. So this is one of the first times that the president is able to communicate with the public on a massive scale. So the first media in the country actually was the political parties. This was a very different form of politics, and it made political parties a lot more important. There was no independent media when the Constitution was written. There weren't like daily newspapers or anything like that the general public had the access to. The political parties had created their own newspaper-like publications, and the purpose of those was to further their own goals. So it like explained the party side of everything. These first newspaper type publications were a way for the political parties to communicate with the people. And that meant that the people got the information that the political parties wanted. The political parties controlled the message that the people got. These basically were just for like elites, for like wealthy people, and for like people that were politically connected. Think about the Federalist Papers, and we've talked a lot about the Federalist Papers this year, but those were not really for regular people. They weren't trying to convince regular voters how they should feel about the Constitution. They're trying to convince the elites. So, early on we have newspapers started by the Federalists, and we have newspapers started by the Democratic Republicans. And this was the main way that people were able to learn information about politics. It's not until the mid 1800s that we start to get the like modern understanding of a newspaper. Probably in history class, you guys remember learning about stuff called like the penny press. But this is about how newspapers became readily available to regular people. The early newspapers from the political parties were like hard to get. They were very expensive, so they didn't reach wide audiences, and they weren't intended for the public. But these new newspapers that started spreading in the middle of the 1800s, they were literally a penny. They were found in cities and things like that. So newspapers started becoming something that the regular public had access to. So for the first time, and from then on, the masses have access to political information. And it's important that this political information is no longer controlled by the political parties. So people are able to get independent information. They're able to get things aside from what the political parties want them to know. So these daily newspapers finally start to have impact on public officials because now they're having to pay a lot more attention to their own relationships with the public. They're able to make sure that they know that the information about what they do will get to the public, and they've got to keep the public happy to keep their jobs. Franklin Roosevelt, as the president, really changed the way that public officials communicate with the public, especially the role of the president here. So radio is starting to spread during his time in office. Like, most people have radio, and he understands what an important tool this is. Radio can allow him to communicate directly with the public. So he starts implementing weekly radio addresses. He called these fireside chats, and so this would be a time each week where the American people, regular people with radios in their houses, could listen to the president talk directly to them. This gave the president an opportunity to spread his message directly to voters. He also he understood the importance of the press, and so he had press conferences every week. This was really important. This gave the reporters a chance to ask questions directly of the president. So he's interacting with the press also. The president was really he understood the importance of controlling the information that got away from him. So he wanted to make sure that certain information was kept away from the public. When things were inaccurate, he attacked those claims, like in his direct communication in the fireside chat. And in general, the relationship between the press and President Roosevelt was really good because this is what we start to see a symbiotic relationship. The president is getting coverage of what he wants to say. He's getting a message out to the people, and the reporters are happy because they have more access to the government than they've ever had before. It was really rare for reporters to get to talk to the president, and now President Roosevelt is setting aside time each week to make sure that happens. So Roosevelt really changed the role of the president in using the media to communicate with the public. Early on, for like 200 years here, the media, the press, doesn't really challenge the president. They don't see the president as an adversary. They see themselves as like allies. Reporters saw their job as to spread the message of the government. So they just took information from the public officials and they accepted it. They didn't question it. They weren't trying to catch the government doing stuff wrong. And it basically stayed this way. So throughout the 1800s and almost all of the 1900s, this is how the press interacted with the government. And all this starts to change in the 1960s with Vietnam War. And this really changed the role of the press and how they saw their job to spread information to the public. This controversy starts with what we call the Pentagon Papers. This is something that we've talked about back when we were doing court cases here. But early on in the Vietnam War, the press just reported what the government told them about Vietnam. So like the officials in the White House and at the Pentagon would just, tell the press how, great the Vietnam War was going and the government was achieving what it wanted to achieve in Vietnam. But actually things were going really poorly. Someone at the Pentagon, which is the Department of Defense, they took a classified report and they leaked it, meaning that they illegally gave that information. They secretly gave that information to the New York Times. So the New York Times has this secret report about how the Vietnam War is actually going, and they're going to publish it. The government doesn't want them to publish this. This is going to be bad news for the government. The government had been lying about the Vietnam War, but the New York Times published this anyway. And we'll talk about the court case in just a second. But this, now for the first time, the public has been informed that the government has been lying to them for a long time about the war in Vietnam. So this is a big turning point because the media gains the public's trust. The media told the public the truth and exposed the fact that the government was lying. So we start to see a shift where the public is trusting the media and distrusting the government. And let's refresh ourselves about the court case here. So this court case, this is one of our required cases. This is New York Times versus the United States. So the New York Times gets a hold of the Pentagon Papers. The government tries to stop the Times from printing this. They file they make an injunction to order the New York Times to stop printing. The Times goes to court saying that they have the First Amendment right to print this. President Nixon and the White House claim that they have to stop the publication because this report is classified. If this report got out and the people could read it, it would be harmful to the United States national security. So the court has to answer the question here. If they stop publication of the newspaper, is that going to violate the First Amendment? Is that going to limit our freedom of the press in an unnecessary way? And listening to all the arguments from both sides, the majority of the court said yes, the New York Times can print the Pentagon Papers. It is important to protect free press, and that's a little more important than protecting the government's reputation here. So it doesn't matter, the court says, it doesn't matter that this information is damaging for the government. What matters is the rights of the press and the rights of us as people to get access to information. So this is a huge turning point in the media's relationship with the government, because the media has exposed a big government lie. The media is starting to gain the trust of the public, and the government is losing the trust of the public. So that's a very brief overview of like early media stuff, but we're just hitting the things that we need to understand. So it's important that we understand that the political parties used to get to spread all this information, but with each new form of media, the political parties lose less and less control over the information. So first with newspapers, then with the radio, and now we're starting to see that the media has the trust of the government. I mean, the media has the trust of the public, and the government is losing the trust of the people. So now we're going to shift and talk about modern media and some more modern time periods here, dealing with politics and the media and seeing how that has shaped the public's relationship with the government.